All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Phoebe Atkinson, and I am standing in today for Caroline, who is on vacation, and she sends her regards today. I am the curator of this series, and I work with Caroline to present all of these fabulous exemplars and alumni and faculty from the Whole Being Institute. So it's my pleasure today to introduce a colleague, Tony Zipple, for you all to hear. I'll tell you a little bit about Tony and also what he's going to be speaking about today. You probably saw, because you signed up, that Tony is going to be speaking about the concept of benefit finding. It is a path forward in difficult times. This is the blurb that Tony wrote. He's going to expand on it today. And Tony's going to also bring us through some slides, and all of that will be provided for you with the recording on Friday at the end of the week. Tony writes, anxiety and depression are chronic difficulties in our world today, and the recent pandemic has amplified these challenges. It often seems that we spend our time ruminating about things that have happened in the past or worrying about what might happen next. Rumination and worry strip us of health, effectiveness, and happiness. Today, our webinar, Tony is going to present strategies from the field of positive psychology for combating rumination and worry. You're all going to learn about effective interventions that will help you find benefits in challenging circumstances and appreciate the good moments that present themselves every day. Time will be reserved for questions at the end of the presentation today regarding application of these interventions. Tony is an expert in improving individual team and organizational well-being and success. Tony consults, teaches, and coaches in areas related to positive psychology, talent optimization, resilience, and organizational change. By blending his expertise in positive psychology and organizational behavior, Tony has helped individuals and teams in the United States, Asia, and the Middle East reach their goals and flourish. Tony is a licensed psychologist and a certified coach. Tony holds a doctorate in rehabilitation counseling from Boston University and also has an MBA from the University of New Hampshire and a master's degree in environmental design from the University of Notre Dame. I also had the pleasure of co-designing with Tony a course in positive psychology for clinical settings for the Whole Being Institute. So I've had such a great pleasure in working in depth with Tony. So let me bring you on, Tony. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. So let me do that first. Let's see.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Oh, there you go. Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So let me bring you on the spotlight so we can get started. Welcome. So people are joining us. Welcome, everyone. Tony, tell me a little bit more about that short bio. First of all, I know you've also been conducting trainings is it Singapore? And tell me a little bit more about the work you're doing currently, especially around this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in a number of things related to this. You're right, I'm doing a series in Singapore over the course of the next 3 months with a group of people who run support groups for suicide survivors. And the topic that we're talking about is, how do you help people who have either attempted suicide and survived, or who have loved ones who have completed suicide, died by suicide? How do you help them build resilience in the aftermath of that? So we're doing a lot of work with groups in Singapore on running their own groups, on doing this kind of resilience building. And I'm also doing some things with Rutgers University on helping mental health organizations in New York and New Jersey. We've got one in the Virgin Islands, one in Puerto Rico, implement strategies for helping staff to flourish, particularly in the aftermath of all of the COVID drama, that they've had to absorb over the last 16 months.
Yeah.
And also with Rutgers working on a practice manual on applications of positive psychology intervention to people who have serious clinical conditions, and what might that look like. So I'm doing a range of things that all relate to positive psychology, flourishing, resilience, bouncing back from trauma.
Well, so this is not for the faint of heart, Tony. This sounds like an area of not only your expertise, but an area that you are very passionate about, helping both individual clinical staff and also the organizational settings. So then that can really have impact in terms of the individuals that they treat and that they support.
I mean, most of my career has been as a behavioral health executive. So I've been COO or CEO for large organizations in 3 different states. And the challenge is always, how do you make sure that you're doing what you need to do with staff so that they have the capacity to really deliver for clients who have often very difficult and complicated situations. And so I'm very sensitive to both sides of that.
Yeah, I know, Tony, that a very important part of your focus is the applied aspect of positive psychology, taking the science into the application. And we're going to get there in a moment, but I wanted to first give some context to those that are meeting you for the first time. What is your connection to the Whole Being Institute, and also your connection to this topic?
Well, I've done things with Whole Being for a number of years now. I did their program, their certificate program in positive psychology, I don't know, 5, 7 years ago. It's been a while. And have done other things with them, and have also, talked with Whole Being Institute about sort of next stage of how do we take this work that we do in positive psychology and make it more available to clinicians and organizations that do work in settings involving people with very serious conditions. This doesn't cure schizophrenia, for example, but none of these things that we talk about in positive psychology do anything other than help to build resilience and make it easier for people to manage the symptoms they may experience. So I've done a number of things with Whole Being and thinking about how we might move that agenda going forward.
Right. I know we have a whole course that's just ready to go, as well as other ideas. Okay, so Tony, your connection to today, to benefit finding, you're going to talk about. Before we get into the slides, can you tell me about this topic and as it relates to your interest? Is this something you've been tracking for a while? Is this a subset of resilience, or how did you come up with this today?
Yeah, so much of the work I do involves work with people who have experienced significant trauma, whether it's people with severe clinical conditions, or I do a lot of things with adverse childhood experiences and people who've been really banged around as children. And those scars are left. We know that people have experienced trauma. There's residue from that. And the question isn't, are there bad things that have happened? We know that there are. The question is, how can you support people in moving forward and finding some strength out of their experience and moving forward with that? So my whole career has centered around this process of helping people who have experienced really bad things find a path forward and a life after those bad things. And benefit finding is such a key part of that.
Wow. So what a fantastic segue into your presentation, Tony. So with no more delay, but one last question I did want to ask. I know we have people from all over. Welcome, those that have just joined us with Tony Zipple. Will be listening to the recording as well. Many people from around the world, around the States. Where are you calling in from, Tony?
So I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky.
Ah, okay. Wonderful.
I've been here now for about 10 years after a chunk of time in Chicago, and was in Boston before that for a really long time. So I've bumped around a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. And we, of course, met up at Kripalu at the Whole Being courses up there. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to, Tony, can you raise your volume just a little bit, if that's possible? There's an ask from one of the participants, and I will bring myself off the spotlight, and then you can go right up on those slides, and I will man the chat and be here to look at if people have some questions. I know we're going to have some Q&A at the end today.
Okay. Hold on a second. Let me get screen share going here.
There you go. Looks good.
All right. So, and Phoebe's gonna manage the chat bar. So if you've got questions or comments, shout them out in chat, and we'll try to get those as we move along. So don't be shy about using that. The goal will be to make this as interactive as we can, given the nature of Zoom and the size of the group. So there are challenges associated with that.
Great,
I
Tony.
want to talk a little bit about benefit finding in this, and benefit finding in the context of the challenges that we face today in the world. And I want to start with a short exercise that I use a lot called STOP. Some of you may have seen it before. It's just a way of getting focus and presence. And STOP stands for Stop, Observe, Take, and Proceed. So I'd love to have us take just 30 to 60 seconds and stop what you're doing, put the distractions aside, all the things that are tugging at your awareness right now, let it go for a few minutes and just observe your thoughts, how your body feels. Take a minute to name your emotions. Think about why you're feeling that way. Just move into it with curiosity about where you are, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, why you're feeling that way. And then take a deep breath. Inhale slowly. Really feel your lungs expanding and hold it for a few seconds. And then just let it out slowly. And then take another breath like that. Just spend 30 seconds feeling the breath entering your body, leaving your body, entering your body, leaving your body. And as you're centered and focused with that, it puts you in a position to proceed in an intentional way. You're right here, right now, in charge of yourself, and it's up to you to make a choice about what you think next, what you feel next, and what you do next. And I hope part of what you do is to focus with me for the next 45 or 50 minutes on this question of benefit finding. So I really like this STOP intervention, and I often use it in training as a way of just getting people focused and starting, and also because it's something that we can all walk away with. This is something that you can do in your own life 5, 10, 20 times a day when you're feeling pushed and pulled and bumped around and distracted. Just stop, observe, take a breath, and make a choice about how you're going to proceed next. So it's a really useful tool to use in a variety of contexts. As mentioned in the little introduction to this, we are in really, I think, challenging times in the United States and globally around behavioral health. Anxiety and depression are really a hidden pandemic. We talked a lot over the last 18 months about COVID, but anxiety and depression rates have been rising for the last decade globally, and certainly here in the United States. We know that major depression, for example, affects 7% of adults and 13% of adults each year. So this is not lifetime risk. Any given year, 7 out of 100 adults will experience a major depression, 13 out of 100 young people, right? And that has tremendous human cost and tremendous economic cost. We know that anxiety is similar. 20% of adults in the United States have a diagnosable anxiety disorder in the course of any given year. Again, big numbers for adolescents, really expensive. And some of that finds its way in the form of suicide. In the United States, we're approaching 50,000 deaths by suicide a year. 50,000 deaths by suicide a year. And those are just the ones that are officially coded as suicide. That has enormous human impact and enormous economic impact. So this question of managing the resilience in the face of these sorts of situations is particularly important. Part of this is that trauma and suffering are universal. You know, there are really only two kinds of people around. There are people who have experienced significant loss and trauma in their life, and then there are people who just haven't been on the planet long enough. Because if you stick around, bad things happen in your life. It is the nature of being a human being. You cannot avoid that. The question is, are there things that we do that actually amplify the pain that we experience with stress and trauma that's part of our lives? You know, do we make choices in the aftermath of those that actually make the situation worse for us? The other thing that's true is that happiness and resilience are also universal experiences. They're every place in our lives, every day. You know, at every moment, there are ways to bring into our consciousness experiences of happiness and resilience. And the other side of the question that I asked about stress and trauma is whether we miss opportunities for growth and joy in our lives. Do we get so wrapped up in the stress and trauma, unable to let go of it, rumination and worry, that we miss opportunities for growth and joy and happiness and resilience that are all around us? That's the question that I want us to wrestle with in the time that we have this morning. Here's a question for you, and you can pop things in chat if you've got a reaction to this. Which of these interactions with dogs do you think you're going to remember 6 weeks from now? You know, the happy, cute, furry dog that you got to pet, and isn't that nice, and it's all warm and fuzzy? Or the dog that looked like it was going to tear your face off? 6 weeks from now, which of those interactions with a dog do you think you're going to remember most?
So Tony, I'm just tracking the chat, and as we look, we have one person that's written the fierce one, and another says the puppy, another says the bottom one, you know, the one with the jaws.
Yeah, and I think that most people, as we do this, will tend to remember the fierce and the scary dog about it. And that's not a surprise, because these kinds of stressful and traumatic events are really sticky in our lives. And there are neurologic reasons for that. Our brains are wired for that. Our brains are designed to pay attention to threatening events. I mean, you know, just think about it. You're a hunter-gatherer living, you know, 35,000 years ago in a small band of people. What's more important to you? To remember that lovely dinner that you had last night where there was plenty of food, or to remember where that spot was where the dire wolves were going to jump out and eat you? To your survival, it's much more important to remember where those wolves are that are a threat to your existence. We are hardwired to cement those bad, traumatic, frightening, difficult experiences into our brains. So when we talk about benefit finding and focusing on the good, our brains work against us in doing that. Our brains work against it. There's a comment in chat about somebody, Lois, who remembers a scary encounter with an animal over 50 years ago. And I, you know, I think that a lot of us can probably identify with those sorts of experiences. Bad things that happened decades ago sometimes feel as alive and real today as they did then. Those scary events stick. Rick Hansen, who's somebody whose work I really like a lot, and I'll reference a couple of times during this, describes it as the brain being like Velcro for negative experiences, Teflon for good experiences, and the result is that things are tilted against lasting contentment and fulfillment. Bad stuff sticks, and we've got to work against that. Now, bad feelings themselves aren't really the enemy in this. I mean, emotions are just the way that our brain communicates with us about what's going on in the world. You know, there's signals about what our experience is. It's just, they're neural flashes, nothing more, nothing less. You know, they're important data that help us to keep us safe and tell us, you know, what we need to do next. And by themselves, these feelings aren't have God, make that good or bad, right or wrong. They're just temporary flashes that occur in our brains. What happens is when we get stuck on them, when we get stuck on those scary, bad feelings, they generate worry and rumination. And sometimes we allow those feelings to control us rather than treat them as flashes. And one of the other reactions we sometimes have to that is that we want to hide from them. You know, we think the solution to bad feelings is try to push them off to the side and pretend that they're not there. That, unfortunately, doesn't work very well. When we suppress bad feelings, we end up suppressing all feelings, including the good ones, right? You can't just shut off bad feelings without also insulating yourself from good feelings as well. And so the solution to that is we need to find ways to listen to bad feelings, to let them in and release them. And in a way to balance that, we need to figure out ways to cultivate more positive experience. The way that we manage bad experience isn't by shutting it out, but by building higher levels of positive experience in our lives. From a neurologic point of view, you know, bad experiences really appeal to our lizard brain. All of that fight, flight stuff that happens in the amygdala, you know, that's where those bad experiences get cemented. And boy, do they go there fast and do they stick. The challenge is, can we work with other parts of our brain, the more advanced frontal parts of our brain, around strengthening the neural pathways associated with benefit, with joy, with resilience, with good emotion and good experience. That's what we're fighting against, the neurological pull of the amygdala and trying to strengthen other parts of the brain. I'm going to touch on two ways that we can think about doing that. And I understand that many of you have been in this whole series. And so you've heard lots of things already about compassion and self-compassion, about gratitude practices and so on. And those are all wonderful and overlapping strategies for this. I'm going to touch on two that I think are particularly relevant to finding benefits and building happiness and resilience associated with it. So the first one will be, how do you find some benefit even in bad experiences? And the second is, how do you have a more good experience in your life and appreciate those good experiences more? The combination of those things builds more positive emotion as a counterbalance to our brain's tendency to want to focus on the bad things. When I talk about benefit finding, I mean positive life change that results from a struggle to cope with difficult events, right? You know, can you find positive things that you can use to move forward with after bad things occur? And if you can do that, you know, we are far more likely to have higher levels of emotional well-being, better health, long-term health benefits. People who are good at this have longer life expectancy, stronger immune system, and report feeling significantly happier over time. So benefit finding helps. You know, I spent a lot of time in Chicago, a poem of Rahm Emanuel, and his comment about never letting a serious crisis go to waste is another example of that. You know, bad stuff happens. You know, it's not that you want to try to pretend it didn't happen. The question is, what can you do going forward in the aftermath of a crisis that makes good use of that? I'm not trying to suggest in this that bad things don't happen, or that that's not painful, or that we want to have bad things happen. I mean, it's just reality that bad things happen. There's just no avoiding it. So we're not trying to pretend in benefit finding that there aren't bad things, or that the bad things are actually good for us. Bad things are bad things. What we are trying to say is, if we accept the inevitability of bad things and focus on where are the opportunities for learning and growth, we have a better chance of choosing an effective path forward. The bad stuff has happened. We can't change that. The question is, what are we going to do moving forward? So benefit finding is a process for doing that. It's also tied closely to this concept of post-traumatic growth. And I suspect all of you have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder. Many fewer people have heard about post-traumatic growth, even though post-traumatic growth is twice as common as post-traumatic stress disorder. But what I mean by that is when bad stuff happens, we get banged around by it. It hurts. It's miserable. We can often, if it's bad enough, get pulled down into this abyss of hopelessness and struggle and difficulty. But what we recognize in post-traumatic growth is that there's another side to that we can come out of that abyss and we can come out of it stronger with lessons and experience that are valuable and help us on a path going forward. We can grow from those bad experiences. I don't know whether we've got Batman fans in the room, but Batman is a wonderful kind of common cultural example of this, right? You've got Bruce Wayne, who as a boy watched his parents murdered in the street. And instead of having that experience crush him, he comes out the other side as a hero, solving crimes and protecting people and there to make sure the city stays safe. Post-traumatic growth. And we celebrate that in celebrities in our world all the time. Tina Turner has talked about this endlessly, the stresses and struggles that she's felt in her life as she went through terrible things as a girl and a young woman. Chevy Chase has been really open about this. Authors like Pat Conroy and Maya Angelou, politicians, Jerry Ford and Bill Clinton have been really open about this. And certainly Oprah Winfrey has spent lots of time very publicly talking about the way that stress and trauma in her life shaped her and made her what she is today. So as a culture, we really believe in this business of post-traumatic growth. The question is, how do we find it in our own lives and make use of it? So when I talk about benefit finding, I don't mean ignoring the bad things. I mean thinking about the bad things in a different context. You know, attaching different attributions to them. Instead of thinking, you know, I was really bullied and pushed around in that, you know, it may be that you learned how to make good friends in the aftermath of that experience. I do a lot of work and have in the past with people who have been in the criminal justice system, some of whom have done really bad things and been incarcerated for long periods of time. And some people have been beaten down and crushed by that. Others say it was the most important experience in my life. I ended up in prison because, you know, my life on the street growing up was terrible. I didn't know any better. And in prison, I had a chance to reflect and rebuild and change my life. And that was so important to me. I wouldn't give it up for anything. So we're saying that in bad experiences, we can find often things that we've learned and taken away from it. You know, I see comments in here about post-traumatic growth from other people, childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, living through the death of a parent. Those are all real traumas. I do a lot of work in the area of adverse childhood experiences. And there's nothing you can do with somebody who's experienced tremendous trauma as a child. They've experienced it. That's done. The question is whether you can give them support and help them learn ways of incorporating that in their life that moves them forward, that counteracts what's already embedded in that amygdala, those fight or flight, stuck in my brain, terrible experiences. Can I find benefit in that helps to move me forward? So those sorts of things are really common. And all of us, as I said, experience bad things. We all have people around us who die. There's sickness and illness in our lives. We all have economic setbacks at one time or another. The question isn't whether they occur. The question is, what can we learn from those experiences that help us to move forward in a fuller, stronger, more complete way as a person. So you can practice this kind of benefit finding. If we had more time, we would maybe do this as an exercise in here over the course of the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes and debrief it. But you can do this in your own life. Maybe sometime later on today or tomorrow morning over coffee. Think about a negative experience that you've had in your life. And it doesn't have to be the most awful thing that ever happened to you. You may want to start a little smaller than that and think about a negative experience that's happened in your life. And think about what happened and how it felt, what it did to you, get some real detail and sense about that experience in your mind as you go through this. And consider what you learned from it and how you're different today as a result of that experience and what you've learned as a result of that experience. And just write about it for 10 minutes. Nobody else is going to see it. Spelling and grammar don't count. Just put words down on paper about that experience and how it's helped to shape you into the kind of person you are today, what you've learned from it that's helped you to move forward. That kind of really short exercise has been shown to have significant benefit. My bet is if you do that even a couple of times a week over the next few weeks, that you'll walk away from it feeling calmer, relaxed, stronger, more resilient, and happier as a result of it, because you'll be able to see in the context of the bad things that happened, the opportunities for growth that have occurred. Boy, people in chat have been sharing some very, very painful and difficult experiences. And those are great ones to use as you reflect on this. I have to admit that one of the things that comes to mind for me right now, as I think about this, I had a dog that I had rescued, and it spent 3 years of time and attention trying to deal with, and he was my closest companion in some ways during COVID. We spent more than 20 hours a day together during COVID, but I could never get him past his reactivity to other dogs. Take him outside and he acts like a snarling beast that wants to tear all my neighbors' dogs to pieces. And he had a couple of really bad experiences, and I had to make the hard decision about having him euthanized. Very painful and difficult decision for me. But what do I learn from that? What's my experience about connection to my dog? What does it tell me about my ability to incorporate pets in my life and the good things about that, the lessons and joy associated with having that dog? There's lots of positive things about it. And he's made me a different person in some ways today than I was prior to that, even though the experience of having to put him down because of that was so traumatic for me. So I think you can find experiences in your life that you can work with. And I want to suggest that you spend a little time doing that kind of an exercise over the next few days. I also want to touch on one other intervention, and that's called HEAL. Rick Hansen, who I mentioned earlier, says that neurons that fire together wire together. And by that, he means that the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about, the neural experiences that we have, reinforce those neural pathways. And the more time we spend focused on those bad experiences, the deeper the pathways get for having bad experience, and the more easily we have bad experience in the future, the deeper it hurts us, the bigger the spaces that it takes up in our heads. And if we can focus on more positive experience, we can begin to crowd out some of that negative space. What Rick says is by taking just a few extra seconds to stay with positive experience, you can turn a passing state, that moment of good experience, into a lasting neural trait, right? You can make it stickier. And if you remember, we talked about bad experiences like Velcro, good experiences like Teflon. This is a process of slowing down and making those good experiences stickier so that you get much more benefit from it.
And Tony, this is Phoebe. I just wanted to pause for a moment. Speaking of slowing down and taking a breath, I just wanted to say in this moment, as you gave the example of your dog, I went through this last year, on many webinars with you, many planning sessions where you were just so attuned to that animal and tried in every which way for years to help support that trauma. So I'm deeply moved by it. This is such a recent intervention that you are sharing about in terms of how you're actually using this. In the chat here, we have another person who has put in something that I think needs the attention, about learning from experience, having hard time really finding, creating that meaning piece, that reinterpreting. And I think that the timing of these things really are very important as well, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it, and about being able to work through these things over time and in a way and in a schedule that makes sense. Lois asked for if I could explain specific ways that the dog was positive to me, that it all sounds awful, and this is pretty fresh. This is only a few weeks old for me. And this was a dog that we had rescued and was just a terror, right? He chewed his way through 2 crates. I spent thousands of dollars on canine behaviorists and dog training to try to get him calm. He had had a really rocky, difficult life, and he ended up as a 65-pound pit hound mix. And he was in some ways a close friend. His favorite place was sitting under my feet in my office while I worked, or on my lap while I watched Netflix at night. If it hadn't been for those small moments when he would do really bad things, the last straw was when he popped out of his harness and struggling with me to get to another dog and chased the other dogs down the street. Unfortunately, the other dogs had owners attached to them, and they ran into their house and had to shove him out of their house. No one was injured, but you can imagine lots of ways that could have gone that would have been really bad. And I worked for more than a month to try to rehome him, but for some reason, nobody seemed to want a hostile, aggressive, reactive 65-pound pit hound around, and had to make the hard decision. But what I've learned from that are a couple of things. It was my first dog. I've never had a dog before. And I learned some things about patience and connection with animals like that. I've learned a lot about recognizing the importance of what animals like that bring to me and my life, and their contribution to my health and happiness. And I'm a very secular, very poor secular Buddhist, and it brought home the sense of the importance of every life and the interconnection that I feel with all parts of life around me. So there are lots of those kinds of lessons that became just really visceral for me in the experience of having the dog and the pain of making the decision to put him aside and have him euthanized. A couple of comments in chat about Rick Hanson's books, and absolutely, there are some wonderful things he's written. Buddha's Brain is a great example. Hardwiring Happiness is a great book. And his newest book, Neurodharma, is a great book on connecting Buddhist learning with neurology. Some of you might find that interesting. So let me touch on a couple of other things as we get closer to the end of this. I want to touch on HEAL in this. This is a Rick Hanson intervention that is designed to increase the stickiness of positive experiences in our lives. And this is something that you can do anytime that you've got 60 seconds and want to feel better. So HEAL is an acronym that stands for have a positive experience, enrich it, absorb it, and link the positive and negative material. So it works kind of like this, and I'd love to have you practice as we move along with it. So think about a positive experience that you had in the last 24 hours. Might be something big, might be something as small as sitting and having a cup of coffee while the sun came up. It might be something that you paid a lot of attention to at the time and was real obvious to you. It might be something that was kind of in the background. And as you think about it, it reminds you, wow, that was really good. Get a clear image of a positive experience that you've had in the last day. And then enrich it by sticking with it for 30 or 45 seconds, right? Just really let it stay with you. Open yourself up to how it feels to think about that experience that you've had. What does it do for bodily sensations when you bring that experience to mind? "30 seconds with it is plenty." And then absorb it. Stay with that experience and let it really sink into you. It's sometimes helpful to think about the experience as an object, a precious jewel that you can carry inside your heart with you any place you go, or as gold dust that sprinkles down on you and coats you and makes you glow and smile as you move through the world. Really absorb the impact of that experience. And the last part of it is, if you can, this is optional, if you can hold that positive experience and at the same time hold some negative experience associated with it at the same time, it can be really powerful. I can hold the positive experience of sitting with my dog on my lap watching television while I have a cup of tea at night and how good that felt. And I can hold that against the difficult experience of having to put him down. And if you can hold those two things together at the same time, it helps to amplify the power of the positive experience. The positive experience becomes even more important in your life. If the negative experience is so difficult that it overwhelms you, put it aside, skip it. You don't have to do this L part. But if you can link the positive experience with some related negative experience and hold them simultaneously, it helps to strengthen that sense of, that is a really wonderful experience in my life. Right? And that's all HEAL is. The whole process you can do in 60 seconds or less, right? And it's something that you can do 3 times a day, 5 times a day, 10 times a day. Think about what your life would be like if you stopped every so often, you called to mind a positive experience, you really stuck with it, absorbed it, really let it sink in, and appreciated how important that is in your life in the context of the difficulties that you face. What a difference that makes in your life. If you do it 10 times a day, it's only going to take you 5 or 6 minutes a day, right? You can do this anytime and any place. Anne is saying, the sensation of pulling weeds in the garden against recent cancer treatment, another really good example of it. Illness is something that we struggle with and that causes us to have worry. We have losses of functioning sometimes associated with it. If we can have good experiences of moving forward and doing things in spite of it and holding in the back of our mind, yeah, I know that it doesn't always have to be, and that we face stresses and risks and challenges. The thinking about the positive moments gets even more powerful. So that's what we mean by HEAL. And I want to challenge you to practice this in your own lives moving forward. Try this 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 times a day. Like so many things you've been talking about in this positive psychology series, you can teach these things in really short order. The magic is in actually doing them. And remember, you're fighting against your brain's tendency to hang on to those difficult, scary, painful experiences. It takes practice. You've got to build your HEAL muscles. So make a conscious effort. I sometimes think that apps like Breathe, for example, are really helpful. You can set it to randomly remind you to breathe. take that random reminder on your smartwatch with your app Breathe as an opportunity to heal as well. And that can be really powerful.
And Tony, I know that there'll be some time for questions. There's another comment that came in, and these are all strategies that really fall under the toolkit of resilience. And so, of course, people have very different things they're drawn to practice. So these are offered in the spirit of, as Tal Ben-Shahar would call it, me search. Try it out if it works. If not, there might be something else that is appealing.
That's right. It's one of the reasons that when I teach this stuff in a context where we have more time, I always teach lots of different versions of things because, some things work for people on one side, other things don't. And you want to be able to pick and choose and find a path that really connects and work for you. It's like exercise. There are all kinds of ways to exercise. Some of them you love, some of them you hate. You've got to find the ones that you love and do more of it. A question that popped in asking, why is it that when we suppress negative emotions, we also suppress positive emotions? It's because our brains aren't very choosy about suppressing emotion. When we try to cut off emotion from our experience, we don't do a good job of differentiating positive and negative emotion in our lives. Remember, emotions are just neural flashes. They're not real things in a sense. They're signals that our brain is giving us about things in the world around us. And when we try to suppress neural signals, it's hard to say, oh, only suppress these neural signals. These neural signals are okay. When we try to suppress the bad neural signals, we also tend to dampen the positive neural signals. It's just the way that we're wired. So let me do just a couple of points in closing, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Okay. You've talked a lot, I'm sure, over the course of this series about mindfulness, and HEAL is another version of mindfulness. Benefit finding is another version of mindfulness. It's a way to slow down our inner dialogue for a minute, to stop and to take a centering breath and to connect with something other than all of the flurry and flow of stuff that's running through our heads. So you can use apps to help do that, and you can do these things anytime you're feeling stressed or pushed, anytime you have a good experience, anytime you have a bad experience that you want to counteract. You can do these things like stop, like benefit finding, like heal in the moment, anytime, any place that you are. The more you do it, the more you build those sections of the brain that are involved in it, and the easier it gets to do it. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you can get those positive neurons firing together, it keeps getting easier. So let me stop with that and just remind you to do it a lot. And a comment I like to use a lot, you've probably heard a lot about Tal Ben-Shahar. He's very closely connected to whole being. And one of the things that Tal says a lot is when we appreciate the good appreciates. This is an example of it. We can use benefit finding and heal to appreciate the good. And as we do more work on appreciating the good, we change our neural pathways and our awareness and are more likely to see more good. The harder we work at it, the bigger the return. The bigger the return, the more we work at it. So let me stop with that, and I can come off of screen share.
Great.
We've got
Great.
10 minutes or so to do Q&A.
Wonderful. And Tony, there was something that I think is very important that was written in. Thank you so much. Giovanni writes about that at the risk of sounding rude or disrespectful, a lot of what you've described today sounds a lot more fancy, a way simply telling myself think positive. And I think this is such an important distinction. This is not happyology. A lot of what you've talked about has the evidence-based research around optimism practice, post-traumatic growth, gratitude practices, the full gamut of the threads that support this in terms of evidence. And I wonder if you could speak specifically to Giovanni's chat there.
Yeah, Giovanni, you are my hero for two reasons. One is because it's such an insightful question, and the other is because you're brave enough to ask it. So I love it. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think this is different in a couple of ways. Remember, I'm not saying you want to skip that there are bad experiences or ignore the bad experiences. You really want to let those in. Those are a part of you. They're signals to you about something important. The question isn't whether there are bad experiences. The question is, what are you going to do going forward? What's the next thing you're going to think or feel or do? And those bad experiences have happened. I was mentioning at the beginning of this a comment by Jim Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He was the highest ranking officer in the US military who spent the longest period of time incarcerated in Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war. And somebody asked him once, how do you find your way through those terrible and difficult experiences? What kept you going? And he said, it's really important that you have to remember two things when you're facing those sorts of bad events. Number one, you've got to have a clear, unflinching, open, courageous view of what your situation is. You're not ignoring it. You're not saying this is really good or pretending it's not there. You have an unflagging, courageous view of how difficult and painful this is. And second, you've got unflagging confidence in your ability to do something moving forward that's going to make your situation better. And that's what we're talking about with it. It's not ignoring the bad things. It's making a decision about what we do going forward and how those bad things can help inform us about the most productive thing to do next. Nancy mentioned Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is just a classic in this area. Viktor Frankl, in concentration camps during World War II, went through tremendous pain and trauma. But what he realized that was in the face of that pain and trauma, there's always a choice that you can make that adds meaning and purpose to your life and that helps you figure out how to move forward with things. So what I'm suggesting in this is not ignoring the bad things or pretending they're not bad or just trying to be happy. I'm suggesting that you can use those bad experiences to help form a more productive path for moving forward.
And Tony, the topic that you're speaking about, especially during this pandemic right now, and all that we've been through, is supported with a 20-page article that came out recently that Dr. Barbara Fredrickson came on to talk about, that mental distress, all of these very real stressors and challenges can coexist with these different interventions to help us bolster, to buffer, to build our mental health and well-being. And your talk today really brings together many different threads of research around optimism, gratitude, post-traumatic growth, resilience. And in resilience, we look at our self-efficacy. What part of this is within my control? And so if we hold what Dr. Maria Sirois talks about, the and, right, that we can very pragmatically say, this has happened, these are the circumstances, and what is within my control. And indeed, in the optimism research, they talk about how if we activate and mobilize what is within our control, we actually have more of a sense of optimism. We can recognize that there is a silver lining, if you will, or we can make meaning, we can come to terms, we can find a way to move forward and to really be with that radical acceptance. People find a way forward because they have more of a sense of motivation, self-worth. So timing is everything. This is a sequence, these are practices, but they are very much rooted in the science of resilience and optimism, and also all the other things that you've referenced today.
And it's a lifelong process. You know, it goes on forever with us. Kathy posted in chat, I'm 67 and I cope as best I could with childhood PTSD. You know, now that I understand it, I try to align my coping skills with the best understanding. And as I said, I do a lot of work with people who have experienced very high levels of childhood stress and trauma. And I'm thinking about one of my colleagues that I do teaching and training with, who if you do the adverse childhood experiences scale, she gets an 8 out of 10 on the scale. Very high risk for all kinds of bad things. But what she says is those terrible experiences have helped her to do a number of things. She recognizes that she has a vast storehouse of strength and courage that's carried her through that. She recognizes that there are things that she can do and contribute in the world to help other people that are that are not as far along in that process to make their way through that she can be the support that helps to guide people through that abyss of despair in post-traumatic growth. So she's incorporated all of those bad experiences as an opportunity to learn and grow, made her what she is today. It's different than saying, gee, I'm so lucky that horrible things happened in my life. I wish I had more horrible things. It's just saying they happened and they've made me what I am today. And they've given me purpose and meaning and courage and strength and skill that I can use moving forward.
And Tony, your wonderful presentation today will be sent out on Friday with the recording and your slides with your contact information, I know as well. Last month, we had the focus because it was Mental Health Month, and this is really extended into June, that you're talking about our mental health in the face of such challenges. And one thing that Dr. Rick Hansen talks a lot about is resources, that we have the stressors that are very real. We have vulnerabilities that come at that, the impact, and that we need to be very proactive in putting in place all the different types of resources that we can. I'm thinking of people that work with you, for instance, and organizations that can then support them to increase their post-traumatic growth and to help them start to frame what is possible. And as we saw with some of the exemplars that you talked about before, I know Oprah Winfrey began with a gratitude journal, and that, it all started there, and she does it to this day. So looking for these micro practices that can help us to increase our sense of hope.
Small things can make a really big difference. Heal is something that's really small, 30 to 60 seconds. You have 24 hours in the day, 168 hours in the week. 30 to 60 seconds isn't very much, but that 30 to 60 seconds done well, repeated over a period of time around even small things can make a tremendous difference in our approach to life, in our neurology, and in our sense about who we are, our strength, our happiness, and resilience.
So Tony, thank you so much today for your use of self, both in the story that you shared, the very personal and recent story of how you are continuing to hold both and really pull the meaning through in your narrative of this amazing relationship that you have experienced and told us about today, and then all the work you've done. Thank you for really walking the walk, as well as teaching us and bringing so much benefit to us. These are tools that we offer as part of our program. Practice them, try them out, experiment. And as Dr. Sonia Lubomirsky, who wrote The How of Happiness, says, that some are going to work and some are absolutely not going to be compelling. So we usually are drawn to things and we'll stay with them if we find them enjoyable and useful. So on Thursday, we're going to have another alumni from our certificate program at the Holbein Institute is going to talk about more flourishing practices using the model of SPIRE. So we hope to see you then. Thank you, Tony, so much for your generosity today. And I'm going to, in the spirit of kind of taking this last minute, I'm going to offer for participants, if you'll type into the chat one thing that you're taking from Tony's chat today about benefit finding and the science of post-traumatic growth and resilience, from just giving us a few slices of that very robust applied positive psychology toolkit. So Tony, if you'll just take this all in. People are thanking you, and this is what they're taking today. We hope to see you all on Thursday. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and also for those listening to the recording. And Tony, I hope you will savor all of those things that are coming into the chat.
I appreciate all the kind words, and really a pleasure being with everybody. And Giovanni, like I said, you get stars in heaven for your comment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. And we'll see you hopefully Thursday, or if not, next time. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Tony.